Hello, my name's Timothy Dolan, and I am going to summarize here a chapter in a book that I'm doing on market-driven evolution. This chapter deals with domestication. It's a rather lengthy summary. It's the book's, again, second chapter, and it deals with both plant and animal domestication. The place to start is to grasp the distinction between natural and artificial selection. Below is a good summary of that distinction, and I'm not going to go over each element in this particular table, but to point out that, broadly speaking, natural selection is what obviously preceded artificial selection being that intervention that our species has visited upon the rest of life. So just to point out where continents began to separate from Gondwana land, the progenitor of rice was established in both Asia and Africa. The jump from wild to cultivation of the Asiatic and African varieties is an example of artificial selection, where cultivation for favored species began and has continued to this day, and if anything, has now accelerated with the availability and the science of genetic engineering. So there's the point of rice. Now, wheat as well is one of the earliest of the cultivated grains. And over many millennia, those progenitors of wheat would be domesticated into different varieties, and very much the signature grain for much of the Western world. So again, wheat is, to a great extent, been artificially selected into the grain we know today. It was a New World grass with the largest seed of any grain, derived from a wild progenitor known as Teonosente, which over millennia domesticated to maize. Maize is the first grain to be so domesticated as to require human intervention to even be growing, because the kernels of modern day corn are so tightly bound to the cob that when that cob falls to the ground, they tend to germinate but then strangle each other. They don't scatter. Hence, they have to be cultivated by human beings. There is no such thing as wild corn. It is interesting how a basic staple food, such as corn, is actually produced more for animal feed and fuel than for human consumption as a table food these days. So it is used for, as I said, animal feed, cattle and other livestock, as well as for fuel, which is a recent intervention. And we now have specific species of corn that are cultivated for ethanol. Now, quite underappreciated is the role of human unconscious selection, in which a species may rise or fall and or morph from unintentional human manipulation. And the great example of this, here it's illustrated in an Asian painting illustration, the pine tree, which again over many thousands of years has found itself in a twisted and bent shape, partially from natural selection, but also from human intervention, which favored, of course, the straight trunks of trees for the purpose of building materials, and as a result were winnowed out of forests, leaving the less desirable twisted shapes that we see depicted in this particular painting. In other words, it wasn't intentional that the pine trees of particularly of East Asia have come to have this twisted form. It is simply what was left from the straighter varieties that were selected by humans for their purposes, leaving the bent shapes standing, if you will. Now, for the conspiratorially minded, one can plausibly see our species as an unwitting agent of the grasses in their war against the trees. We cultivate grains at the expense of trees. Here we see this image from Kilauea in the big island of Hawaii, looking across to Mauna Loa, which shows that our transforming of an ohia forest on the right side into pasture lands on the left. This is an example that has been visited all over the world, where the grasses, that is cultivated grains, have taken ever wider swaths of what were forest lands, again in service to human interests. Now, quite remarkable is the signature manipulation of another species, and now we're switching over to the domestication of animals. And of course, the chief among those are of dogs, something we're quite familiar with, dog domestication. The chart here shows the various breeds that are recognized by the American Kennel Club, each very distinct. And as we all know, dogs come in myriad shapes and sizes. These purebred varieties, of course, include mixed breeds that we're mostly familiar with. But again, these pure types can range from Great Danes to the tiniest of terriers. So again, it is something that we have manipulated genetically over, again, many thousands of years from what were wild wolves. And it is remarkable that even today it is conceivable that a dog can interbreed with a wolf and produce offspring. So their genetic similarities are such that they really are very much of same or certainly of a similar species. We often overlook the costs to cultivation. The one being that the body had to adjust to a grain-centered diet, something that we may not be aware of because it is only in recent kind of forensic paleontology that we understood that when we went from a hunter-gatherer variation of diet, roots and berries and some meats, to a grain-centered diet primarily of bread and rice, and another being the problem. The problem there is that our gut couldn't adjust to it. The result was we actually shortened our lifespans over that transition period. We also had the problem of waterborne diseases, especially in rice paddies, where mosquitoes and other waterborne creatures carry disease to humans through the water and into our food supply, and then sometimes directly into our bodies. So there have been costs to cultivation, again, over many hundreds of years, and we deal with pests and other problems with cultivation, fertilization, and sustaining the land consistently. That is a real battle. So we're constantly weeding, we're constantly trying to improve the stock to be, say, drought resistant and with a longer shelf life. So again, our interventions into domesticated plants as well as animals, sometimes have a cost to them. We can see other examples of artificial selection in the form of the cultivation of boutique varieties of garden food crops, like various kinds of lettuce and tomatoes. We've recently seen such novel varieties of boutique garden fruits and vegetables that become something that we seek after and often prefer over what is generally called heirloom varieties. Now, with the increasing awareness of human intervention on the natural environment to its detriment, there are a number of remediation strategies around food production, and these are centered around lessening meat production. So we have a great deal, again, this is one of the downsides to large-scale meat production, is that they create a great deal of methane. They're very hard on the land, and they are, at the end of the day, when overconsumed, not particularly healthy. So there is now moves to create either cultured meat or plant-based varieties, which have far less environmental impact and may be a plausible future for the human species, because the land cannot sustain large-scale meat production under current conditions. So this is an area where we're seeing a great deal of new innovation taking place. And again, it's a manipulation of plants and animals to make for a more sustained environment. So I mentioned that fruits and vegetables have had their natural coloration, flavors, and sizes enhanced by artificial means. These varieties have come to dominate the supermarket place, and the heirloom and legacy varieties are usually relegated to the natural food stores and to a lesser extent farmers markets and the like, because there is a market preference for these new novel varieties that can be tastier, can be more appealing. It's one of the reasons why carrots are orange. This is a preference that was built into them through artificial selection, and something that is, I think, continuing to go apace. It is important to understand the power of market preference and its impacts on the evolution of life generally. So far and away, for me, the most dramatic example of selective breeding concerns the altering of dogs into myriad shapes and sizes. This is exemplified by the bulldog. This breed was so named for its being developed to bait bulls, which was a blood sport in the 13th centuries right into the 19th century, primarily in England, but also on the continent as well. There was this myth that a bull that was so panicked and attacked by these dogs would have the effect of tenderizing its meat. It was a bit of a myth, but one that was popularized and kind of justified the use of bulldogs. So here we have a picture of what a bulldog actually looked like 150, 200 years ago. It looks, of course, unrecognizable to what we see as bulldogs today. These look a little more like perhaps pit bulls than they do the contemporary bulldog. And again, it marks how quickly we can morph in this case, the head and the body of a bulldog into something more of a gargoyle, in my view. So let's look at that. Here's the modern bulldog. The modern bulldog, shown here, has a calmer disposition than its ancestor, but it does retain some of its original traits. In this case, it has an extreme shortening of the muzzle, which has led to chronic respiratory problems with this and other similar breeds like boxers and pugs. This has become such a problem that we're starting to see some steps taken. Some of them are rather half-hearted, as the guidelines set out by the American Kennel Club to try to remediate this problem with other dog breeders, something that's totally voluntary in the United States. In the case of the Netherlands, they've actually passed legislation that requires that the snout of a dog be at least a third of the size of its skull. So we're starting to see these steps taken because the effects on the dogs are not particularly good and lead ultimately to some suffering. So again, this is a bit of a summary. This particular chapter in my book is very lengthy. It's a big topic. There's much, much more to say about it. But this is a taste, it's a sample, and I hope we can carry on with other examples of, again, market-driven evolution. This is where our species is beginning to have this effect, but it is, and again, I can't emphasize this enough, market-driven, and it'll be the market, I think, that will end up having to rectify some of the excesses that we've seen with our impacts on the earth. So that'll wrap it up for now. Thanks for listening. And the third chapter, I'll give a quick preview simply by the title, which deals with Cyborg Planet. And again, this is how we alter ourselves and have perhaps maybe from the start. Okay, again, Timothy Dolan, signing off.